Okay, folks, our next speaker, Jim Whitehead with Mid-America Bigfoot Research Organization. Let's give him a big hand.
Well, first off, is everybody here enjoying the conference? Well, I'd like to give the organizers for this a round of applause. They deserve it. A lot of hard work they do. These things are not easy to put on. So before I do this presentation, I'll give you a little bit of a background of myself. I'm with the Mid-America Bigfoot Research Center, and I'm also a member of APES, and I'm loosely affiliated with several other groups. I have degrees in natural science and biology. I was trained in wildlife biology. So I'm a bit of a nerd, just to let you know. And that being said, I'm also usually known as the guy the purveyor of green Bigfoot casts at conferences in these regions. So that's kind of become one of my little trademarks. And today I would like to talk to you guys about the best evidence that Oklahoma has ever produced. And there's different grades of evidence, but for it to have made this list, it has to really, really stand out. Okay, now, just to let y'all know that there's actually been some really good evidence that's come out of Oklahoma, stuff on par with anywhere else in the United States. And like I said, this list is what I consider the best of the best. So, to come up with this list, I had to have some criteria. And one of it is this stuff, if it withstood scientific scrutiny, it made the list. What does that mean? Well, people try to debunk anything that comes out about Bigfoot. They try to debunk all the evidence. However, if it takes the beating from the academics and comes out on top, that's gold. The other one, if the chances of something being a hoax are extremely low. We're talking so low it's practically non-existent. It made the list. Has to be very hard to explain. You can't just rationalize it away. And what do I mean by this is there's something I coined a few years ago called jumping Occam's razor. Occam's razor's a statement that means the simplest explanation's the best. I have seen some people trying to debunk Bigfoot evidence that come up with some absolutely insane leaps of logic to try to explain it. There was one guy that somebody said they seen a Bigfoot, and he was the other guy was trying to explain it away. And he goes on to say, well, what you saw was 3 bears standing up in a row. And I overheard this conversation, and I just kind of went, you do realize bears don't do the conga line, right? So, if it strengthens evidence found by other groups, scientific repeatability, if they all kind of correlate, if these things are out there, then it makes sense that the evidence should kind of be backing each other up. So if it does, it made the list. So first off, I'm going to talk about the Chicken Man handprint. And as you can see, it's over there in Canadian County, Northern Grady County. How many of y'all have ever heard of the El Chicken Man? Okay, it's kind of, its limelight's faded a little bit. But this is absolutely one of the strongest pieces of evidence that has ever been found in Oklahoma. And this happened many years ago in the 70s. Yeah. The 30th of December, 1970. There was a farm, and everybody says it's the El Chicken Man, but actually it was on the south side of the Canadian River at a place called Palmer Farm. would have been closer to the town of Wheatland than El Reno. But El Reno's the big town in the region, so that's what everybody says. Basically, something had been raiding the hen houses on this farm, and one day the farmer goes out there and finds the door ripped off, and there's a handprint on the door. So, the guy calls the cops, and the cops bring a whole bunch of other people in. Fish and Game come out, the OSBI sent the state forensics investigators out, primatologists even get involved in the investigation. And it's a wild story. So this is the aforementioned handprint. And I mean, it doesn't look like much, it just looks like a smudgy handprint, which is basically what it was. So, the guy, again, had reported something was getting into the chicken house, and the state forensics people came out and looked at it, and they said it doesn't look human. So they contacted Dr. Lawrence Curtis. And by the way, this is a guy that I don't think gets enough respect in the Bigfoot community. This is a guy that deserves to kind of be recognized along the likes of guys like Grover Krantz and other people like that, because this guy was extremely active, Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, investigating evidence. This was a scientist. This was somebody that was kind of a smart guy. He had a background in primatology. He was also, at the time, the director of the Oklahoma City Zoo. And he was extremely interested in them, so he decided to get other people involved. So he brought in different wildlife biologists. And all these different wildlife biologists, the guys that are used to the native animals, examine it. Now the primatologist has examined it, and they all conclude that it's an unknown species of primate. So, whatever it is, it's something that's not human, but it's a primate. And this is actually a photo of Dr. Lawrence Curtis. So, why do I include the El Reno chicken here? Many scientists looked at it. Science went out to beat this thing into the dirt to say that it's got to be a hoax. And it took the pounding and came out on top. When people say, show me one piece of evidence that withstood the scientific scrutiny, that's it. It won. So, all examinations concluded it was an unknown species. Now, what Dr. Lawrence Curtis actually brought to the table, because he was investigating other things. He was involved with the Momo investigations and a little bit of the Falcon investigations as well. But he also had looked at prints from other areas in Oklahoma, Arkansas, et cetera, et cetera. And he stated that these prints were extremely similar to some prints that were found around Stillwater, Oakwood, the famous Oakwood gorilla, McAllister, and Salisaw. Well, Stillwell. So we're going to move on to our next major bit of evidence, the lump mouth photos. And this is over in the Concho El Reno area. How many of you are aware of these photos? Ever heard of the Concho photos? We're not talking the casino footage, but yeah. All right, they were taken in November 2000 by Russell Lumpmouth, and this was in Concho, and they were initially investigated by at the time it was the TVRC, now it is the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, and the guy that was photographing was actually kind of making fun of his boss. They had a tribal event out there in the woods, and he looked over and he seen his boss reaching down to pick up some trash that got left behind. The guy says, "Oh, I'm going to document this. My boss is actually doing something." So he takes a photo, and standing behind him in the photo is something very interesting. Again, I just kind of covered this already. So here is one of the two photos. It's been cropped. Y'all see that? There's a humanoid figure standing back here. In the uncropped version, this is way in the background. And he took two photos. In the second photo, you can see it's moved, it's turned. So this got these people really excited, and the group investigated them. And these are kind of the conclusions that they came to about the lump mouth photos. The subject is roughly 7.5 feet in height, dark in color, very bulky. And when they compared this to Patty from the Patterson-Gimlin film, the anatomy seems to match up very well. Okay. They actually did a recreation. They put somebody out there in the spot where the photo was taken, and the guy is 6 foot, and kind of hard to make out, but here's his head, and over there is the head of the creature. So you can see it is quite a bit larger than a man. And next, we compare it to Patty. That looks an awful lot alike. Similar morphology, similar anatomy. So why did I include this on the list? The strong similarity to the Patterson-Gimlin film subject. The size kind of rules out that it would be a normal human. Not that it couldn't be, but you'd have to really stretch to find somebody that big. And it's in an area that's got a long history of activity. The famous casino footage happened there. There have been dozens of sightings out that way. So, tag 7. Now, that kind of sounds strange, but again, the same group of North American Woodhead Conservancy came up with this ingenious idea to try to tag one. And they tagged something. Okay. The radio tag project was deployed July 25th, 2015. And on August 28th, one of their tags got caught. And they made over 25 radio tag contacts up until June 2016. So basically about a year. And the way they did this is they actually glued radio tags inside of cockleburrs. How many of y'all know what a cockleburr is? Okay, now these cockleburrs were hanging from a line 8 foot off the ground. So whatever got tagged had to hit that line with the cockleburr on it 8 foot off the ground. And they was attached to the line by a magnet so it wouldn't, potentially get unpulled. Whenever something would hit it, it would just, yank you loose from the magnet. And it also, if you've seen it, you probably wouldn't think it was nothing out of the ordinary. It looked normal. Okay, here's one of their cockleburr tags. And that is a picture of one of the tags hanging from their line. If you saw that, you would just think it's a leaf or something hanging from a piece of spider web or something. Okay, they tagged an unknown creature. They tracked it for about a year. 25 radio contacts were made with this tag. They were out there patrolling the back roads with a radio receiver getting beeps. And each one of these data points that they got allowed them to kind of get some behavioral information for whatever this is they tagged. And the thing is, animals tend to act in a set way. They have set size ranges, they have set behaviors. It's normal for a species. The thing is, whatever they tagged wasn't acting like anything should. Okay, this kind of is just kind of a 2 square kilometer plot point that's showing all of the hits kind of relative to each other in the region. So the thing didn't exactly move too far in that 2 years. Basically, they figured out that the home range of whatever this is about 72 square miles, and it also seems to show a seasonal shift in sightings. And this is kind of their estimation of the range overlaid on Google Earth where they tagged it at. And within that range, there were clusters of sightings per season, like I just mentioned. During the wintertime, it headed north. During the summer, it hung out kind of down to the west, and then during the spring, it would move south. And probably taking advantage of resources, maybe shelter. Reasons for its inclusion. The data collected shows behavior that could not be explained. I talked about that. So the odds of it being a known species are pretty low due to the setup. There isn't a lot of 8-foot tall animals native to Oklahoma running around down there. There are bears down there, but the really big bears actually tend to kind of hibernate in that area because a lot of those bears were actually imported in the 80s during a predator relocation project. And the native Oklahoma black bears, the strain that was already here, are about the size of a big chow dog, so it wasn't them getting tagged. Cocoa birds don't stick to feathers, so they didn't tag a bird. So you're left with, well, what did they get? And finally, it's strengthened by the McLean County data, which I am about to talk about. And this is one of my little projects. So what is the McLean County data? Well, the McLean County data consists of over 200 sighting reports at the time and multiple footprint finds that were used to plot data points. And it became a lot easier with the presence of what I call repeat offenders, and I will explain that in just a second. And there were also repeated sightings of juveniles in this same area. And between the footprints and the sightings of juveniles, which appeared to be the same set, it kind of gave us an idea to potentially calculate a growth rate. So what is a repeat offender? Well, what I call a repeat offender is an animal with a very particular identifying feature. Think of, let's say, a bald Bigfoot. People would see it and it would be recognizable. So if you have different witnesses saying, yeah, I seen a Bigfoot and it was bald on its head. Well, you got a repeat offender there. It's been seen by multiple witnesses over a course of time. So it has to have some kind of distinguishing characteristic. If they get reported by people that don't know each other. And I've got a couple of examples listed here. Up in the Boston Mountains, there's been repeated sightings of a white Bigfoot since the 90s. Down south of the Kiamichi Mountains, there's one that I have nicknamed Mask. He has been reported multiple times down there, and he appears to have like a birthmark on his face. People said he almost looks like he's wearing war paint or something. It's just a pale blotch of skin. But when you've got people that have never met each other describing the exact same animal years apart, that's not easy to explain. There was another case of a Bigfoot in Florida that was reportedly crippled. That would be another great example of a repeat offender. So, basically, you can use these repeat offenders to kind of plot out where the range is that they tend to hang out at. So, the sightings in southern McLean County were so consistent that it probably represents a single family unit. The eyewitness descriptions are the same. There are footprint finds, and they all seem to be the same creatures popping up over and over. The Washita River and the South Canadian River seem to respectively be boundaries because you don't see reports of those repeat offenders above or below it. And in addition to that, some of the major highways also seem to function as a territorial divider. So the repeat offenders in this case are the individual we've come to refer to as Stink and the twins. Stink is a male, about 7 feet, extremely stocky. And what makes him stand out is he's reddish in color, but the upper body has a different coloration. When he was younger, it was more of a blondish color, but it's been turning gray in the most recent reports. And prints that we have attributed to him that have popped up after sightings show that one foot is normal. The other foot seems to be missing a couple of toes. I'm not saying it's a deformity. It looks more like it had an accident, like it got caught in a trap or something. Stink also stands out because he is hands down the most aggressive Bigfoot I've ever heard of in reports, and he has a habit of completely terrorizing the witnesses. And the twins, two particular young Bigfoot, they were reported as toddlers, first seen, if I remember right, 2003. And they were seen playing in a road by a motorist. And over the years, these two have been consecutively seen together. That's led us to kind of speculate they might be twins. Okay, this is a map of Garvin, Grady, and McLean County. And I plotted the sightings out, kind of spread out. And you can see there's a big cluster there. So, when we kind of look at the repeat offenders, kind of hard to make out. There's a green line there, but it's showing kind of where the repeat offenders keep popping up. And that's kind of indicative of a range. And interestingly enough, there's also a seasonal sighting shift there too. During the winter months, they seem to move more towards the North Canadian, or not the North Canadian, the South Canadian. During the summer months, they would actually move closer to the Washita, and we think it's because there's a lot of times the South Canadian will actually go dry in the summer, but the Washita almost never goes dry. So, first glance, that's a huge range. It's about 500 square miles. Way bigger than the range estimated by the North American Wood-Ape Conservancy. However, I got onto one of my resources at OSU, and they actually had the amounts of forested land listed per county. And so I added up the forested land within this range. And what I found was shockingly close. Area X, where the Tag 7 data has a range of about 72 square miles of forest. The McLean County troop seems to have a range with about 70 square miles of forest. So they also show a seasonal sighting shift. So this is a case where you get two pieces of evidence kind of backing each other up. Now I mentioned the potential growth rate model. Again, thanks to the twins, they were repeatedly seen and reported in an area we refer to as Mushroom Gully. And they were seen together so often that, that's why we call them the twins. And we would find small footprints there, and we came to believe they were from the twins. You'll have to forgive me, I'm kind of tired and I'm losing my words. And this is a series of 3 small footprints that were cast within about 2 years of each other, and they get consecutively larger, but we believe it's the same creatures. And when we look at all the data points, we got quite a bit we can work with there. We got sightings, footprint finds, all describing the twins. So I worked with them. This is where I plotted out the average size on the footprints. And you see a nice line there, and then there's another one. So let's put some lines through there. That is a growth rate. Now, some of those dots were not part of the twins, and they were found later. Anybody notice what that second line means? It means another baby, another one. So, based on that data, what could I interpret? What can I compare it to? Well, that growth rate, if it stays consistent, they seem to be growing faster than a human. And if, assuming that they start out similarly sized to humans as a baby, they could probably hit full size in 13 years. And interestingly enough, I've talked to several other research groups that were doing the same thing in their research areas. There were some members of the North American Wood Ape Conservancy I was talking to, and some people from BFRO, and they were crunching the numbers and got the same result. So that's a case of scientific repeatability in the data. And why did I include it? It strengthens tag 7. The other groups have the same research data kind of pointing in the same direction. So next, I'm going to talk about the Texla hair sample. And this is one that I think a lot of people have forgotten about, but it's very interesting. Okay, it was collected at Concho, Oklahoma in 2007. They found a twisted up cedar tree with a bunch of hair matted in it. 4 foot off the ground, they found cocoa burrs stuck in the hair. They were dark and they were up to about 7 inches in length. And they also found some skin tags. And they sent this stuff off to be tested in multiple labs. This is a picture of the tree that the hairs were found in. This is showing some of the twisted limbs that were covered with the hair. This is a branch off the tree, and it's kind of hard to make out, but it's got hair all over it, along with some cocoa burrs. Then they took some digital scans under a microscope. And these are their hair sample scans. So first, they sent it to Dr. Henner Fehrenbach. Then they also sent it to Dr. Lynn Rogers, who is an expert on bears. They sent some to OU, and I want to say there were 2 other labs, but I couldn't confirm it. I want to say they sent a sample to the Chicago Field Museum and the Texas A&M, but I might be wrong. But then they also sent one to a genetics lab for testing. And the last sample they gave to me. So this is what they had to say. Dr. Fehrenbach basically said it had to be a bear and threw it out. Dr. Lynn Rogers, who is one of the leading authorities on bear, said flat out, it's not a bear. He couldn't identify it. OU checked it out, and they said that it matched no native, domestic, or exotic species in their collection. And they have a huge collection. Then they followed that up with, where did you get this, and can we get more? So, hearing this, they sent it off for genetic testing, and it got sequenced. And the lab tech that did this did not want to get in trouble, so everything was kind of hush hush, don't tell my name. But genetic sequencing said it was an unknown species not found in Zoobank. If you don't know what Zoobank is, that's an online registry of the genetic sequences of everything that's been sequenced over the years. So if it's not in Zoobank, that means we don't have any DNA from this species, i.e. it's very likely an unknown species. My findings: the hair was very similar to human pubic hair in internal structure. It was naturally worn, meaning it had never been cut, and there was a medulla in it, but in at least some of them, not all. Now, a lot of people have tried to say Bigfoot hair doesn't have a medulla, and that's not a really good diagnostic trait because medullas, when your hair gets older, it ages and it starts to become brittle. The medulla dries up and disappears in the hair breaks off, starts regrowing, and it'll have the new hair will have a medulla in it until it starts to weather and decay just like the hair it replaced. I guarantee you I can take 10 hairs off of anybody's head in this room, and some of them are not going to have medullas. And for those that don't know what a medulla is, it's an inner core in the hair that keeps it nourished. So, I decided to show it with one of my mentors who happened to be a very noted biologist in the state. One of the board members for the Oklahoma Academy of Science has 50 years of experience as a wildlife biologist. This is a guy I would trust to identify any native animal in Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, or Texas. He couldn't identify it. Visibly, the hair strongly resembled hairs collected by the North American Woodhead Conservancy in Area X. And I compared them to a sample I'm going to talk about here in a little bit from McLean County. This is the Area X sample, by the way. The hair is very similar. So I included it because it was examined multiple times. They could not debunk it, and the species remained unidentified. So, and it's the fact that it's so similar to the hairs from Area X, and similar to the McLean County sample, it got included. So this is the McLean County sample, aka the Mushroom Gully hair sample. So in 2009, I was driving home from work. I worked at a warehouse at the time, going through college, and something crosses the road in front of me. Whatever crossed the road ducked under a willow branch. I went back the next morning and measured this branch and found that it was 9 foot off the ground, meaning whatever ducked under it was 9 feet tall. And it slid down a rocky embankment. When I went back the next day, I measured the willow branch, and then I found hair on the rocks that it slid down. Also found 18-inch impressions in the leaf litter. And this is a photo of Mushroom Gully. This is where the sighting happened. And this would have been the direction it was coming from. And that's the direction it went. And you can see it's lower down there. That's where the rocky embankment slides down. And it's kind of hard to make out. Here's the road. There's the rocky embankment. So I went to the college with the hair, and I took several digital scans with the microscope. And some of them do have medullas. This one doesn't. However, they all have a naturally worn tip. When you cut hair, it will be kind of at a permanent angle. So that is a hair that's never been cut. And at the base of the rocks, this is not very clear in there, but I decided to illuminate the impression. That's an 18-inch impression. And notice I don't say footprint because it doesn't have a lot of detail because it's leaf litter, but with the siding and everything else, it's in there. Okay, findings. The hairs were all approximately between 4 to 7 inches, dark in color with a slight reddish tint. Some of them had a medulla, some of them didn't. Again, they were very similar to human pubic hair, naturally worn. The scale pattern, morphology, and diameter were all identical to the textile sample. Only difference was the color. So I included it because it strengthens the textile sample. And if the textile sample came from an unknown species, then my hair had to as well. And that hair, since I saw an 8-foot creature, it more than likely, or a 9-foot creature, it more than likely came from that. So they were 80 miles apart, 2 years apart. So this is scientific repeatability. The grass ball incident. And this is up in Adair County. June 19th, near Stillwell, there was an investigation into a footprint find, and the team decided to camp out there, and they started getting pelted with little bundles of grass. So they went out to the listening post after the landowners reported finding a track, and the grass was all about 3 feet tall. About an hour after dark, they started feeling what they thought were bugs hitting them, and it was balls of grass. Lasted for a couple hours, and during the event, one of the people there claimed to have seen a Bigfoot moving through the field through one of their night vision devices. This is the location. It's just a field. And the grass balls themselves were kind of just wadded up bundles of grass that had been tied together, about the size of a cotton ball. And I cannot think of any animal that would tie little balls of grass together. These were kind of what the grass balls looked like. They also found matted down areas in the grass, shown here, where something had been laying down. And they came to the conclusion that they weren't throwing these grass balls, something was flicking them. Because, I mean, they're so light, if you went to throw them, it's just going to kind of float on down. So why did I include it? Could not be attributed to any known species. There was a sighting of a Bigfoot at the time it happened. And, there was kind of some more evidence backing it up. And it's also in an area with a lot of Bigfoot activity. So, the final category to make the list are the mass sightings. What's a mass sighting? You have to have a lot of witnesses that reportedly see a Bigfoot. There have been actually a couple of sightings in Oklahoma that have had a large group of people see them. The most notable is the Camp Red Rock encounter, and this happened in Caddo County. And Camp Red Rock is a Girl Scout camp. And this happened May 22nd, 1981. And there were at least 80 witnesses. This is a huge mass sighting. And it also occurred during severe weather. There was a tornado outbreak. And the groundskeeper and his wife claimed to have seen the creatures many times. The wife also kind of fessed up that she was putting table scraps out in the woods. So the tornado information on this. The Binger-Scott tornado touched down just west of Binger. It was a powerful F4, 6:45 p.m., and it got within 2 miles of this Girl Scout camp. And anybody that's had animals that have been out and around during a tornado, animals act nuts during tornadoes. This is a picture of the tornado. So, it's nothing to joke about. So let's talk about the encounter. At the time, the camp was occupied by about 70 girls plus 10 staff. The tornado touched down, forcing the people to take refuge in the dining hall. As the storm began to let up, supposedly a Bigfoot came running out of the woods, screaming and howling and slapping the walls. And I was independently told this story by 4 women now that were all there when this happened. So, I included this because the sheer number of witnesses that were involved, the 4 women all told the exact same story, And if this happened when it wasn't a tornado, I would assume one of the groundskeepers was out there running around trying to scare kids. That kind of thing happens. But what hoaxer is going to go out in the middle of a tornado and try to do that? There's also reported sightings in that region. These are the cabins at Camp Red Rock. And this is Braniff Hall, the dining hall. This is where all of the girls took shelter at. So as you can see, there's big windows. So they would have noticed this thing circling the building, screaming and howling. There's another picture of it. Okay, the next mass sighting, the wrestling team encounter. And this happened up in Adair County, not too far from where the grass ball incident occurred. A group of 12 wrestling students, along with 2 MABRC researchers, were out there. The sighting lasted for about 10 minutes. And there were 2 groups. The first group reported the activity, and then the rest of them came to check it out. Several of them heard splashing. They smelled a really bad odor. They said it smelled like dead fish. And they began to shine their flashlights in that direction. And when they did, they basically spotlighted a Bigfoot. And they got their lights on the Bigfoot. These wrestlers are not moving at all. The Bigfoot's just standing there. And as soon as they turned the lights off, they heard crashing. They turned the light back on, it's gone. This is a location of the sighting. This is kind of where it initially would have been. This is another photo of the same area looking downriver. And this is a recreation of the sighting itself. You just kind of see a Bigfoot standing back there and what it looked like through night vision. So, with that said, I'm trying to hurry this up so I don't go over. I do have some honorable mentions, including one I'm going to briefly talk about that I didn't bother to put on here. There was another mass sighting that happened very close to here, the Green Hill Monster. I didn't include it because I could never find consistent information on how many witnesses were actually there. Some of the sources say there were close to a dozen witnesses. Some of the sources say there were 2 witnesses. I don't know, so I couldn't include it. Another one was the hallmark photo. There was a gentleman that was researching in the Arbuckles that in the late 90s snapped a photograph of something big, upright, and furry walking down a trail. And it actually made the Oklahoma Today magazine for that year. Why do I not include it? Well, because number one, the guy was going out there to do Bigfoot research. Number 2, he was alone. There's nobody to back it up. So there's a little wiggle room in there. The Lawton Werewolf. And this one, how many of y'all have ever heard of the Lawton Werewolf? Okay. Basically, in the Wichita Mountains, people started reporting this crazy story about something that looked like the Wolfman from the old Lon Chaney Wolfman movies, wearing pants, running around. And again, it's one of those things where I can't get a lot of good information, but I know there was a lot of sightings. A cop that was active then told me they had about 20 call-ins about it. Soldiers supposedly chased it across Fort Seal, but there's just a lot of missing data there. The 4 doctors' sightings, this is one I investigated. There were 4 medical students that were about to graduate, officially become doctors. They decided to go out for dinner one night. And they were driving down a road just east of Oklahoma City. And basically, one of them looked down in the creek and said, "There's something standing in that creek." And they turned around. they all looked back down the creek and they said that it was still standing there. And they all said, you know, it was a Bigfoot. And you had 4 doctors all describing it, describing anatomy, describing the appearance. They described the same thing. I didn't include this because there is a chance it was a hoax. It was close to Halloween. So, similarly, there was a deal where 6 psychiatrists were driving up from Salisaw to Tulsa for a convention, and they reported seeing something cross the road. And all 6 of them said, okay, don't describe it. When we get to the hotel room, draw what you saw, describe it there. They all agreed it was the same thing. But again, this could have been some joker in a monkey suit running across the road. And finally, the 2010 deer population growth analysis. I took it on myself to try to calculate how many deer there were in the state in 2010 as part of a project for the college I was going to. And what I found was very interesting. I took known numbers, kind of mapped at it a bit, and what I basically determined was, at the time, there was about 1.2 million deer in Oklahoma based on the average ratio of bucks to does and what was turned in that year. Now, I was also able to calculate a growth rate on there. I immediately assumed a 50% loss due to infant mortality on the deer, and I also factored in predation and everything else. And what I found was something very interesting. Based on those figures, roughly every 7 to 10 years, the deer population should double in this state. That's not what we're actually seeing. Something is keeping them in check. There's something preying on the deer. Now, why did I not include it? We can't say what's preying on the deer, but something's preying on the deer. So, thank y'all for listening. I'm sorry if I bored y'all. So, are there any questions? Wow, I was really boring.
Or really thorough.
Sure, we got one back there and then we got one over here. So, Brian?
Yeah, your data on the deer populations, was that during a time when chronic wasting disease could have been a factor?
It was before we had issues with chronic wasting disease. It seems to occur in waves. But yes, I was actually factoring in illness into it too. Okay, there was another question over here.
Your growth rate chart that you did with the Sasquatch peak, did you actually go to project foot per year in height? Or-
No, it was just assuming a steady growth rate.
Okay.
No, not without more data. But given the data that I had, that was the best I could do. I was just thoroughly impressed that other groups were getting the same data. So, yes, sir.
Discount the casino incident on our email, or
Without the video, I have to.
we're supposed to put a handbrake on the car?
Yeah, then there's actually more than that because there were 4 additional witnesses. Because I went to the casino and I've actually talked to the people there, and I talked to the former head of security that was actually the head of security during the time. And he basically told me that the reason that footage will never see the light of day is right after word got out, they had people pulling up and shooting off into the woods there. And they have people that go out in the woods every day there. And he basically was hinting that somebody got shot by somebody that had pulled in there and started trying to bag a Bigfoot. Apparently, from what I gathered, it was probably non-lethal. Somebody probably got winged in the arm or the leg, but still, I can understand why they didn't want to connect that area with Bigfoot. So, are there any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, what would you average the lifespan of one of the things to be?
Well, most animals, if in optimum health, will last as long as their detention will let them, their teeth. So assuming that they don't, if their teeth don't go bad, it would probably be comparable to humans or gorillas. Most people don't realize this, but our natural lifespan's only about 35 to 40 years. Because that's when your teeth generally start going bad. When you look in the historical data, most humans tended to die between 30 to 40 back in the day before we had modern medicine and stuff like that. The same would apply to animals, so it would probably be very similar. Yes?
Could you use the repeat offenders theory to help gauge, age of a creature, how many years over a period of time?
Yes.
Whiteface?
And the individual that we were referring to as Stink in the sightings is a great example of that because he has been seen for almost 25 years. That's how we know he used to be more of a blondish color before he started going gray. Yes.
Are these population estimates that you know of?
Yeah, that's a mixed bag of nuts I'm not really gonna get into. I could make a guess, but the thing is, every Bigfooter you're going to ask will give you a different answer. So, I think the population is probably whatever the environment can actually support. You go further out west, resources are more spread out, so there's probably not as many of them, but they're there. You go in this area, resources are more condensed, more forests.
I wonder if the movement around was easy because food is.
Yeah.
Not that food, you gotta go somewhere else.
Yeah, and we actually see that. In the data we were getting from my research area, they didn't stay in one location for very long,
Right.
but they would be back within a few weeks. So it's like they would leave and let the area kind of replenish a little bit and then come back. So we came to kind of refer to those little areas where they kept getting seen as pit stops.
Makes sense.
Well, there's no more questions. I'll get off of here and hopefully somebody else can entertain you guys since I put everybody to sleep. Anyway,
All right, thank you, Jim. Hey, we're gonna take about 10 minutes again.